So as I said before, buried treasure. That's what this is all about. Have you ever found a treasure map?
Read a book about it once.
Well, it's Shavuot. I was asked to come to a gathering of Moedim keepers in Kansas City. That was like 6 months ago, basically. 4 months ago. So I was talking to them about this notion that the alphabet is a treasure map. For the last 6 months, or maybe even a year, I've been contemplating this idea. As this is just for the record here, I believe this is the last talk of what we've done throughout this week. We might have one more on Friday.
We are definitely going to have one more tomorrow at noon 30.
But that was supposed to be just a floater of questions
But
and answers.
I know we've gotten so many people that are. We've added extra innings. We've extended Sukkot, so you may get 3 or 4 more.
Oh, that's fine. But the idea was that what I was trying to show you. How many have we done so far? Which number is this?
4. This would have been number 8, but I think it's number 7 because of earlier today.
Okay, so this is the 7th video that we've done this week about explaining what's in the language, how do you see the language, why we should look at the language, and the key to the code of how the language, the letters of the alphabet, are determined, or what makes them have substance more than just the phonetic speaking of words or the face value of the pictographic meaning of the letters, like Aleph is an ox, Bet is a house, Gimel is a camel. As a matter of fact, I don't even think we ran through them looking at that level, which we'll do here as part of this. But in contemplating these letters, the idea occurred to me that the alphabet is a treasure map, and I thought to assess what that meant and try to draw up what it meant, and I've actually been working on that for closer to a couple of years. And as I was searching for what those 22 different steps along this map would be, searching through specifically Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea, those 4 books, I was trying to find places in those books that carried the essence of the Aleph, the essence of the Bet, the essence of the Gimel. So on a normal treasure map, you might expect that, well, find that big rock in the field and face north and take 3 steps, and then turn east and take a couple more steps, and you find a stick, and you know, they take you step by step. But a very interesting thing happened. As I was trying to apply, you might say, my artistic, subjective eye towards these stages of the alphabet, trying to read it as a treasure map, I discovered that it really is a treasure map. And as I was looking for the steps of the treasure map, I found that this is indeed a treasure map that's been hidden all these years. And I wasn't inventing the map, I was in the process of discovering the map. Kind of blew my mind a little bit, or quite a bit. So here's an interesting perspective on a treasure map. I referenced, when I was speaking to the folks in Kansas City, which was a gathering together of numerous different congregations, there's 3, call them Hollywood movies, that came to my mind. There's Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, And then you've got the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown's thing, where he's looking for the Holy Grail. And then there was National Treasure with Nicolas Cage. These are movies from quite a while ago. An interesting thing with Indiana Jones, one scene that came to my mind is that there was a treasure room, and there was this, he was just this treasure hunter, and there was this artifact in there, and he knew that there was booby traps. And he had some kind of a treasure map or that he had found, I don't recall those details, but this treasure map said, here's this obstacle, this riddle that he had to get past. The penitent man will save his head, or something like that.
Oh, I remember that one.
Remember what he did?
Yep.
What did he do?
He kneeled, dodged,
Why did he kneel?
because he was bowing to the Lord.
It was a riddle. He realized that the clues along the map were riddles. And you don't just go to the tree, turn left, take 3 steps, look up, and it wasn't that kind of a map. Each step along the map was a riddle. And the reason it was a riddle is because the maker of the map wanted to lose or get rid of treasure hunters, infidels that had no right to the treasure. So only the serious people could find the map or take the steps along the map to get to the treasure. The riddles were designed to eliminate as many contenders as were unworthy of getting to the treasure. And I found that this map of the alphabet works the same way. In Dan Brown's, what he did there, to go along with that story, he said the penitent man will save his head. What is a penitent man? What does he do? Oh, a penitent means to be repentant, humble. So he gets down on his knees, and just as he drops to his knees, this big blade comes, whoosh! And if he hadn't dropped in just that second, he would have lost his head. And there were other skeletons around.
With heads off.
With heads off him. And in that movie, there were a series of those kind of obstacles that hurdles as you would, that he had to get past in order to finally get there. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant was the ultimate treasure. And then we sit there and think, well, wait a second. Why is the Ark of the Covenant the ultimate treasure? Because some people think, oh, the Ark of the Covenant, that's the presence of God. Well, the Israelites had the same mistake. The Ark of the Covenant was sitting in this place called Shiloh, up in the Galilee, northern Israel region. And the Ark of the Covenant was in the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And they were losing the battle or having a difficult time with the Philistines. And somebody got the big idea, hey, let's go get the Ark of the Covenant and bring it into battle with us, because that means God is with us. And then we'll conquer the Philistines. And so they did that. They got it. And they brought it out in the battle. And the Philistines, this is recorded in the scripture, the Philistine says, oh no, the Israelites, God is with them. Okay, boys, it's do or die. Fight like crazy, because otherwise it's all we got. The Philistines started fighting like crazy, and guess what? It backfired on the Israelites. They fought so tremendously that they conquered the Israelites, ripped them to pieces, and came back, and I think, didn't they burn the Mishkan down? Or something happened where that's where Eli heard about it, the high priest. He fell backwards, broke his neck. His 2 sons were killed, and it's like the whole kingdom got torn apart. It backfired on the Israelites. I was doing a job once in Los Angeles, working in a guy's house, and he had an interesting thing. There was this globe of glass, and inside was some figure made out of brass or gold or something. And I said, well, that's interesting. What's that? And he says, that's a Hittite god. It's an artifact dug up somewhere over in the Middle East. And I thought, a Hittite god? The Israelites were supposed to destroy all those things. What's he doing with one here? Well, somehow it was a piece of one. It was a genuine relic. And he said, you know, the thing about those Israelites, they were pretty smart. You see, back in those days, the people carried their gods on like the Roman legions had these big things with the symbols of their deities. And each legion would have a different figurehead, you know, an eagle or a bear or some kind of dragon. And they'd march them into battle, you know, like the Vikings had the head. It wasn't just to scare people, but this represented their god, you know. And it's kind of like battle flags of soldiers. If one guy didn't even necessarily carry a gun. He carried the flag. And boy, if that flag fell, somebody else better pick it up, because if your flag's lying in the mud, everybody's going to lose heart. And you're already defeated. Somebody's got to keep that flag going, raising it up. And this guy said those Israelites were pretty clever, pretty sneaky. If the Hittites had their God, and even if they had a full standing army still fighting, if somebody captured that Hittite God, they were defeated. And they lost heart, and they were virtually given up. And even though they still had a standing army, everybody just kind of surrendered and were killed, because their God was compromised and taken. But those sneaky Israelites, boy, they had an invisible God. An invisible God who could never be captured. So they would never have to be defeated. And soon as the Israelites sunk to the mindset of their enemies, having their God in their midst in this object, that was their defeat. Yahweh had given them this wonderful thing. He says, I'm invisible. You can't pin me in a box. So this Ark of the Covenant does not represent where our Elohim is. It's just a box. Now, in the tabernacle, when he showed up to visit with his people, his presence was somehow, his kavod was above this box. And that's another part of the story. But the point is, it's just a gold box with some stuff in it. That's the Ark of the Covenant. Dan Brown's movie about the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail was supposedly the goblet that Yeshua drank from at the Last Supper, gave to his disciples. They drank from. But at Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting of the Last Supper, there's the table, there's all the disciples with Yeshua sitting there, but there's no goblet. Why didn't he paint a goblet? This was the mystery that set up the chase, that was the tension of the narrative in that movie. And while the central character was trying to trace down this mystery, somebody else was chasing him, trying to catch him and kill him from being on this hunt, because the mystery turned out to be information. It turned out in the movie that the Holy Grail is not even an object. It's like I could sit here and say, here's the Holy Grail. Hey, if anybody gets this, oh, now they've got this treasure. Well, if it's made out of gold, it might be worth something, but nobody knows what the Holy Grail was made out of. Maybe it was made out of ceramic, maybe it got lost or broken, or maybe it was just a piece of plastic, or... Well, they didn't have plastic back then. I just want to see if you guys were awake. The point is, let's entertain the concept for a minute. If you found the Holy Grail, now remember, this Holy Grail was so precious that all during the Middle Ages, you had the Knights Templar, and you had armies of people fighting and killing. Millions of people died trying to find the genuine Holy Grail. Probably in our terms, billions of dollars were spent on military campaigns and espionage trying to find the Holy Grail. Let's suppose somebody found it. Here, Lex, if you were to take a drink out of the Holy Grail, what's the benefit to you? What do you suppose?
Healing.
Healing. Okay, let's say you take a drink from the Holy Grail and suddenly you're healed. Are you going to get sick tomorrow? Or the next day if you get in contact with somebody who has the flu? Or
I meant the power to heal.
the power to heal. Okay, it's going to impose upon you some divine gifting of supernatural abilities. So you get a bunch of guys that are thieves and liars and crooks looking for the Holy Grail. So suddenly, if they get the Holy Grail and take a drink, they're imputed with divine virtues. It's like, do you think the Almighty would do that? Do you think if a guy that was totally contrary to his covenant grabs one of his artifacts and takes a drink, suddenly he's got gifts of the covenant? That's almost like the devil thinking that he could put his throne above the throne of Elohim for some reason if he took a drink out of this thing. I mean, that, to me, If you know anything about Yahweh, anything about His words, anything about His covenant, that's irrational, illogical, simply not true. It's just stupid. If you think, oh, it's just about magic, well, now that puts that into the realm of witchcraft, sorcery, magic, or some kind of thing you get in Dungeons and Dragons, not the Holy Grail of the God of the Hebrews, the Israelites. Anybody else got an idea? What does anybody hope to gain if they actually took a drink from the Holy Grail? What's that?
Everlasting life, like in the movie.
Everlasting life. There's an interesting verse in Psalms, I think it's Psalms 108 maybe. It's the last line in the alphabet song. Still the blessing yet remains. Chaim et ha'olam. It says there that Yahweh commands the blessing, live forever. Chaim, that's live, et ha'olam, forever. So everlasting life is not what you get if you find some piece of pottery and take a drink out of it. Everlasting life is what you get when Yahuwah, Elohim Zavot, the name that we talked about, decrees and commands it to be so. And anybody that thinks they can circumvent His throne and grab a hold of something that only He can give is either insane or an idiot or ignorant or living in fantasy land because he's been watching too many Walt Disney movies or something. Again, I can't see any sense of a shred of reality. Why did so many people over so many centuries try to find that cup? Wisdom. You know, in the scripture it tells us that the fear or the recognition of Yahuwah and who He is and what He stands for and what His throne is founded on, that's the beginning of wisdom. Just the beginning. So if someone wants wisdom, instead of chasing some phantom cup, why don't they try to seek the Almighty and say, who is this guy? And then we see the scripture, also written in Psalms, that He says, Mishpat and Zadokah are the foundation of His throne. What are those words? Mishpat, the balancing of scales. Zadokah is righteousness, but it's also victory, deliverance, and salvation. Foundation of His throne. What does that mean? Well, those are just words, but if we had wisdom, we might know what they mean. What does it mean when somebody says the foundation of their throne is balanced scales and righteousness? He goes on to say in that same verse that Emet and Chesed precede His face. So we mentioned this other day. If you have a wedding processional, you've got the flower girl and the bridesmaids, and then here comes the bride. So the processional is that which comes first. If that verse says, truth and kindness precede His presence, His face. If we have a church service and we're not telling the truth, He can't show up. If we have some kind of a gathering, even if it's Sukkot, and we're unkind to one another, He's going to leave if He even did show up. Truth and kindness have to pre-exist before He can be there. So the principal occupation we might have is ensuring that we're about the business of truth and kindness. And then, I believe it's a proverb where Solomon said, truth and kindness around your neck, as it were, will not fail you. Will not fail what? Well, apparently, if truth and kindness precedes His presence, and His presence is contingent on truth and kindness being there, then I can put 2 plus 2 together and get 4 and say, you know, if truth and kindness won't fail to accomplish something, what do they accomplish? Him importing Himself to be in our presence. And if that's what we want, then to comprehend that is really where wisdom is at. So somebody else, again, who thinks that they can find a a piece of trinket pottery sitting on a shelf in some museum or some swaps meat store in the Middle East and say, oh man, I think this is the Holy Grail. If I can just take a drink, oh, I'll be so smart. That's pretty darn crazy. And if something's going to backfire like it did for the Israelites, I would dare think that if you did find something that you supposed was the Holy Grail and you took a drink out of it thinking you get wisdom, it just might make you insane or crazier, and then you'd lose everything because you're seeking the wrong Elohim. Elohim is translated God, but it's also the word for power and strength, which is to say, where is it that we're even looking? So how could anybody be so crazy to think that if they took a drink from the Holy Grail that it's going to give them wisdom? The only way to do that is to turn your back on everything that the guy said who initiated the Holy Grail to begin with. Yeshua at the Last Supper. He was keeping the moed of the Feast of Pesach. Oh, let's forget everything he said, everything he stood for. If we could just get that thing in his hand. Yeah, now I got something. No, you don't. If anything, it's like grabbing a scorpion and letting him sting you in the mouth. I mean, if Indiana Jones, author, and if the author of Searching for the Holy Grail can think of these booby traps that cut your head off, and don't you think Yahweh's already got those bases covered? Here, what's another suggestion? What do you think you might get if you took a drink from the Holy Grail?
Well, Jehovah says that his spirit went with the Ark of the Covenant, where the Ark of the Covenant was, he was. So there might be the Ruach part of it that a lot of times the kings tried to kidnap that so that the spirit would leave Israel and be with them so they would conquer.
Okay, so I believe what she's saying, if I reinterpret it in my own words here, that somehow, because Yahuwah himself is the one that designed the Ark of the Covenant, and if Yeshua is the one who said, hey, will you give me a cup I can drink out of? Now, did he say, well, just get a paper cup? Or did he say, well, just go down and get one of those solo plastic cups, or go to the special store and get a special golden goblet? Did he decide which one, or was it just the one that happened to be there? I mean, it was a rented room. But if he chose one, let's say he chose one, it's like, oh, even Yeshua chose this cup, or even Yahweh designed the Ark of the Covenant. So maybe they have some magnetic attraction to his spirit. Let's just say it's this phantom illusion that just his spirit. Even if we can't pinpoint the benefit, it's just something about him being in association with it. Maybe that's the benefit of finding the Ark of the Covenant or finding the Holy Grail. Now there's one more, National Treasure. Nicolas Cage. From what little I remember from that movie, because it was many years ago, each clue was like a riddle again. And I seem to remember this one scene where he had some sort of optical device that he had to spin it a certain way, and certain numbers or letters showed up, and he could look through it and see something because of the pattern or the code, like a
Kaleidoscope.
kind of like a kaleidoscope in combination with a combination lock. I mean, if you had just the right combination, it would work like a kaleidoscope where something else would come into view and you would see it, and that would get you through this door to the next clue to find the ultimate treasure. Interestingly enough, the national treasure that he ended up finding at the end of the movie was like going to a rummage sale. It's just a bunch of junk. Oh yeah, it's made out of silver and gold, but it was in some basement in Washington, D.C. somewhere, and it's a bunch of stuff from Egypt and Greece and Persia and Rome and the Aztecs and it's just a bunch of rusty loot. And that's our national treasure? Really? If your nation is based on money, well, just think. The Native Americans that used to live in South Dakota cared nothing for gold. And so they let it lay it on the ground. And it's only when another race of people came in and go, whoa, hey, look at all that treasure. It's like, where? What treasure? This soft yellow metal. And it's like, yeah, well, whatever. Same thing in California. Those Indians didn't care anything about that yellow stuff laying on the ground. I mean, when the gold rush happened, you could just walk up and pick it out of the ground. I mean, nuggets, huge, which is why everybody went into a frenzy. So a national treasure is only something valuable in the mind of that people group, not necessarily common across the board with every people group. So let's apply this. If the nation of Israel had a national treasure, what would it be? Would it be a bunch of artifacts that pirates can steal and stick in their museums around the world? Or have to guard with guns? Is Israel's national treasure really the Ark of the Covenant, which is some box that the enemy can steal and then you get in big trouble for taking it out of its place? Is Israel's national treasure really the Holy Grail? Really? What do you suppose Israel's true national treasure is?
Torah.
Scrolls, obedience to Torah.
Jehovah.
Well,
According to Blazing Saddles,
a nice bowl of beans? According to Blazing Saddles. Here's the point. I would agree with all of you. Which means that whoever, well, except for that one, whoever is looking for Israel's national treasure, you got words, you've got the Torah scroll, you've got that it's actually the person of Yahuwah himself within the words, it's not just the words that you'd find on a scroll written in a museum. As a matter of fact, Jim Barfield found the interpretation, I don't know if you know about this, of the copper scrolls that were discovered in Qumran. Do you know about that? Jesse Running Bear was here the other day and had made mention of it. If you look up the Copper Scroll Project on the internet with Jim Barfield, you might find this. In Qumran, where these caves are, in this one cave, they found a bunch of parchment scrolls on this side, hundreds of them, but over here by itself, as I understand the story, was a copper scroll. And it was wound up in such a way that it took them about 5 years before they figured out how to carefully cut the thing open and lay it apart in such pieces that they wouldn't break it or crunch it. And now here they have these words. But what do they mean? Well, people know what they mean, but Jim Barfield was given this divine insight, guy down here in Oklahoma City, to interpret those words as being a treasure map. And the treasure map is where the loot from the temple is buried, and it's in Qumran, and he was able to translate those words and identify exactly where the treasure's buried. And it's still there to this day. Treasure to the tune of billions of dollars of gold, silver, and jewels. And it's specified. The map was written by, I believe it was 4 different people, different handwriting. It was written in Hebrew, and it describes, so many steps down, 3 feet deep in a hole by the eastern side of this wall, by this portico, and then he found one up the side of this mountain, and blah, blah, blah. I won't say too much other than to say, if Jim Barfield talks about it, that's up to him. And him discovering this set up a bit of a frenzy. This was a few years ago, of people scrambling to find this, and the Israeli government, after he dug down 3 feet, shut it down and said, okay, everybody get out of here. Why is that?
Because he was close.
He was real close. And you know what the treasure was? Gold, silver, and jewels from the temple. Wait a minute, is that our national treasure? Didn't you guys just say that it was in the words? So then what do we care about gold, silver, and jewels?
Money.
You can't spend that gold to even go buy a soda pop on a hot day. All you can do with that gold is stick it in a museum and say, hey, looky there. Yep, we sure got one of them, by golly. That's about the only good it is. What do you suppose the practical value of Yahweh's treasure, the national treasure of Israel, if it's understanding these words, what do you suppose the practical value would be? Any guesses? How about eternal life, wisdom, being able to say, Yahweh Rafka, and the person is healed. Walking on water, Yeshua said. everything I do, you'll be doing, and even more. I maintain that Yeshua did not walk on water to prove that he was God. He walked on water to show us what we were supposed to be doing if